Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut-Rate Commander First Impressions, the series where I give my mostly blind impressions to precons from upcoming sets. My name is Grazzet, and along with my co-host and editor Kaprak, we're going to be going over the Tricky Terrain precon.
Well, with that, let's just get right into it. As per usual, take a peek at the box art here. What do you think?
Simic, Tricky Terrain, Ramp Lands, Grow Value. This looks like a pretty standard Simic Lands deck, honestly. I'm expecting to see a lot of the similar things we've seen in existing land decks, get lands into play, and then generate value off of that. So, honestly, it looks pretty straightforward.
On the tin, it looks like Simic doing Simic things at Simic rates.
Yeah, in other words, kind of boring. But we'll see what happens. Maybe this will surprise us if this puts a different spin on Simic lands.
So moving on real quickly, we have the face commander for the set, Omo, Queen of Vesuva. For 2 and a hybrid, green or blue, you get a legendary shapeshifter noble, who is a 1/5. On ETB or attack, you put an everything counter on each of up to 1 target land and up to 1 target creature. A land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types, and each non-land creature with an everything counter on it is every creature type.
Okay, so for 3 mana, we're getting a very defensive stat block, and then this ability is kind of crazy, honestly. I don't even know where to start with this. First thoughts are this is a tribal commander, or typal commander, in which every creature becomes every type, so lords that care about creature types and such can get a lot of mileage out of here by effectively turning all our creatures into changelings. And then as far as lands are concerned, which according to the box, it's what we're mostly concerned about here, this more or less cares about lands that care about other land types, like caves have internal synergy, Urza's lands have internal synergies, because if I'm reading this right, putting a counter on one of the Urza lands turns it on. Is that not right?
It makes it an Urza's Mine, Power Plant, and Tower.
So then it taps for the augmented amount of mana, correct?
Yes, and a cave, and a desert, and a locust, and a swamp, and a forest, everything.
Yeah, this is I honestly don't know where to go with this one. This is one of those that the rest of the deck kind of has to dictate how powerful the commander is, because I honestly have no idea how to go with this one, or where to go with this one.
It is also worth mentioning, if you remove Omo, the everything counters seem to stop doing anything. I believe that's how that works, because what the counter does is dictated by the card.
We may have to check that, because there was also an issue with the commander who distributed flood counters that apparently, even if they left the field, the flood counters kept doing what they do.
See, the reason I think it's that way is because it says each land with the counter on it is then that. It seems to be a static effect dictated by the card, and not an effect dictated by the counter. But I may be wrong.
Yeah, we may need to check that, but I'll put that in the description if I find out one way or the other.
Okay. Well, we also have a backup commander here in the form of Jyoti Moag Ancient. 2 green and a blue, get you a legendary elemental, 2/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 green forest dryad land creature token for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. And at the beginning of combat, land creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Jyoti's power.
Okay, this is what I would usually expect when thinking about a Simic Lands commander, because we're looking at this thing creating Arbor Elves, effectively, and then it gives land creatures a bonus, which it would start off as a +2/+2 bonus and then just become bigger over time.
Well, it gets bigger if you make Jyoti bigger.
Right.
It's always a +2/+2 if you don't.
Right.
It's the number of Arbor Elves that increases as you cast them over time.
Yeah, but we're in Simic. We have +1/+1 counter shenanigans that also coincide with the land theme, so making this commander bigger is not going to be a problem. But yeah, overall, this kind of feels more in line with what a lands deck would be in comparison to the face commander. Now, again, I don't know how the deck looks like. Maybe there's a lot of that internal synergy here with the lands and the land types that make the face commander a little bit better, but just at a glance, Jyoti seems more in line with what I'm used to as far as Simic Lands is concerned.
I will say it is funny that casting your commander gets you a landfall trigger.
Oh yeah, so this is technically ramp.
Well, it's not just ramp, it's landfall, which frequently matters in a lot of Simic Lands decks.
Yeah, true. So yeah, Jyoti does get you a free landfall trigger when they come down.
And then more and more and more.
Right.
These are definitely both synergy-focused commanders, I would say.
Yeah.
They're not going to blow you away without seeing the rest of the deck. So, let's move on. Okay, the first of the brand new cards for this deck is Wonderscape Sage. 1 and a blue. Get you a Moonfolk Wizard. It is a 1/3 with flying. You can tap it and return a land you control to its owner's hand to draw a card. Then you discard a card unless that land had a non-basic land type.
Okay, for 2 mana, you're getting a 1/3 evasive body, which is fine. And then doesn't cost you any mana to bounce a land back to your hand that you can turn into card advantage.
It's actually part of the cost.
So even if the ability's countered, you still get the land back.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's niche, but yeah, you are correct. But it does give you card advantage so long as you're returning a non-basic land to your hand.
No, a card with a non-basic land type.
Such as caves, such as Urza, etc.
Yes.
Okay, fair. So that synergizes with what the face commander wants to do, so yeah, fair. This provides you with card advantage. This lets you get more lands into your hand so you can replay those lands for extra landfall triggers, not to mention certain lands have ETB effects, so you can reset those as well. Yeah, this one's pretty good.
I think that's going to be the big utility one here, rebuying land ETB stuff, and occasionally getting you an extra land drop on a turn you don't have one to get you an extra mana.
Because yes, you tap the land, you bounce the land, you play it again, tap it again, yeah, so technically this does ramp you.
But it does wipe the counters off from your commander, so when used with that, use sparingly.
Fair.
The next card we're going to be looking at is Rampant Frogantula. For 2 and a green, you get a 3/3 frog creature with trample. Rampant Frogantula gets +10/+10 for each player who has lost the game. Whenever Rampant Frogantula deals combat damage to a player, you may mill that many cards. Put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped.
Okay, so for 3 mana, you're getting a 3/3 Trampler. Not the biggest body in the world, but fine. The +10/+10 for each player who lost the game, that's not really reliable, but it does get better towards the late game when certain players have been eliminated. Having this come down as a 13/13, 23/23 is pretty good. But then, that last ability, Self-Mill, I have a love and hate relationship with Self-Mill, because you can lose a lot of value from your deck by doing that to yourself. And yes, I'm aware that you're getting the lands back, and you put them into the battlefield, so in this case you are ramping yourself and you're getting the landfall triggers and such, but it's one of those things that if you don't have other ways to recur other sorts of permanents, other sorts of spells, it's not going to be great for us.
It's definitely a card that goes in decks that can utilize its graveyard, but man, this is a lot of ramp in a full dedicated lands deck.
You have to have ways to pump this naturally, because if you're playing this on curve without anybody being eliminated, a 3/3 Trampler is blocked easily, and even if it's not blocked, you're just going to mill yourself for 3. That nets you maybe a land. This gets real good if you can get its stats real big.
That second line is not just trinket text. It makes this a relevant card if you draw it in the late game, too.
Yeah.
Our next of the first bit of cards is Sage of the Maze. Sage of the Maze is a 1/3 for 1 and a green for an elf wizard. You can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors. And you can tap it, and until end of turn, target land you control becomes an XX citizen creature with haste, in addition to its other types, where X is twice the number of gates you control, only as a sorcerer. And then you can tap an untapped gate you control to untap Sage of the Maze.
Okay, 3 mana, you're getting a 1/3 mana dork.
Double mana dork.
Well, fair. So this does fix you. We're in 2 colors, though, so limited mileage there. And then you get to animate your lands, based on the number of gates you control, which, with our face commander, every single land that has an everything counter on it is a gate, so this can get potentially very, very large. And then, with the last ability, you can tap a gate to untap it, so you're technically ramping.
Every gate becomes 2 mana.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot to like here. Mana acceleration is always important. Being able to weaponize lands is important. And being able to get even more ramp by tapping gates, which our commander enables, makes this very, very good as a source of repeatable and fast ramp. So yeah, I like this one. I really can't complain about this one.
It is also just a nice little piece for all the people running 5-color gates out there. It's a great fixer, nice beater, and a ton of ramp.
Yeah, the gate decks are not the most common thing in the world, but they will appreciate this. And it functions there, it functions here, so yeah, this is a good one.
Okay, moving on to the next card we have here, our first sorcery, Aggressive Biomancy. XX and Simic. Create X tokens that are copies of target creature you control, except they have, when this creature enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control.
Okay, so double X spell. We are going to have a lot of mana available to us since we are a lands deck, so being able to get this to high numbers is going to be very feasible. And then it's just a matter of targeting your biggest thing on the board to turn it into a repeatable fight effect, to make your own Azuri's Predation, to get a bunch of threats off of the board, and then get a bunch of ETB triggers, get a bunch of bodies on board.
Possibly a bunch of your creatures dying.
That's true, so you can get a bunch of on-death effects too. Yeah, this is a good one. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it in this deck. It depends on how our creature base is looking, if there are things that are worth copying. But yeah, this one's good. This one's just a generically good clone card, and if it doesn't see play in this deck and it gets cut for something else, other Simic decks that are dedicated to cloning their stuff are definitely going to want to put this in their arsenal.
Fun fact, you can target a land creature with this.
Like the Arbor Elf that our alternate commander creates.
or just one that you've animated, and I do believe they will come into play as just lands that will not fight anything. So this just becomes a big ramp spell.
Okay, I can see this being good here. I can see this being more of a piece for dedicated Simic clone decks, but it could do some work here depending on what our creature base looks like.
Fair enough. Our second sorcery, you might have seen this one as it did come out really early. March from Velis Vel. 2 and a blue, you get sorcery. Choose a non-basic land type. Each land you control of that type becomes a copy of target creature you control until end of turn, and gains haste until end of turn. Flashback for 4 and a blue.
So, 3 mana, you functionally get to animate all your lands with an everything counter on it to become the biggest creature you control.
And any other caves or deserts or what have you.
Yeah, fair, but they have to be the non-basic land type you declared, so if you happen to have a lot of gates, for example, and the other lands that have counters on them are now gates by default, this gets better. Overall, yeah, you really can't complain about this. Mass animating lands is one of the main ways that lands-based decks tend to close out games, so being able to do that here is going to be another way to give us the reach we need to go ahead and close out the game when we need to, depending on how our creature base looks like. Again, because like the previous entry, it is dependent on having another creature in play to copy with this.
That being the last of our sorceries, we're going to move on to the first of our 2 enchantments that are new with this deck. The first of them being quite possibly one of the simplest cards in any of the precons, Copy Land. For 2 and a blue, it's an enchantment that you may have copy land enter the battlefield as a copy of any land on the battlefield, except as an enchantment in addition to its other types.
Okay, so it does what it says on the tin.
This is copy artifact, this is copy enchantment, it's just copy land.
Which is ramp, because it comes down as a copy of any land on the battlefield, whether that be yours or your opponent's. And I'm guessing here we're going to have a significant amount of utility lands we're going to want to go ahead and get extra copies of.
Honestly, there's just a long history of wanting to get copies of other lands just because that's useful.
That's true, but generally we're just going to grab people's utility lands or extra copies of our own utility lands for more value. That's where I see this getting the most mileage, and because we're in lands, I can see it doing that quite well.
And sometimes you're just going to need a forest and you're going to copy somebody else's forest.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes you're just hosed in islands and you're going to go ahead and just grab the extra color you need, so having that in your back pocket's never a bad thing.
And again, sometimes you're going to get the other guy's Bajuka Bog because you want to Bajuka Bog somebody.
Right, yeah, it's a good piece of utility.
It's not just your lands, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
And our final enchantment here, and our final non-land new card, Desert Warfare. 3 and a green. Whenever you sacrifice a desert, and whenever a desert card is put into your graveyard from your hand or library, put that card onto the battlefield under your control at the beginning of your next end step. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 5 or more deserts, create that many 1/1 green, white, and red Sand Warrior creature tokens. They gain haste.
Okay, so deserts generally can sack themselves in some way, shape, or form under their own effects.
A handful have cycling, but yeah, most of them have sacrifice effects.
Right, and this functionally turns that into ramp.
Not necessarily ramp, but you don't lose the land.
Fair. It lets you get it back. If you pitch it from your hand, you get it back. If you pitch it from play, you just get it right back.
If it gets milled, you get it back.
Fair. That's also another option here. And then it eventually turns into a way to weaponize your deserts by creating a bunch of tokens that have haste. They can swing in on the turn they come down. Yeah, that's not bad.
It is at the minimum 5 tokens a turn.
And our commander makes it so that we don't have to draw into deserts. We just turn any of our lands into deserts. And there are certain utility lands that crack by turning them into deserts. When we crack them for their effect, we get them right back. So yeah, this is going to see play in this deck, and possibly in every single deserts deck ever.
Probably in every single deserts deck ever. The fact that this lets you do what deserts do, but also keep your desert count up, is good.
Yeah, because eventually blowing up your own lands sets you in a bad position. Go figure. But this circumvents that weakness and gives you extra ways to build up your board in doing so. So yeah, you really can't complain about this one. This one's pretty good.
Heck, at the floor, this just lets you reuse your scavenging grounds a bunch.
Yeah, which means you're constantly blowing out people's graveyards, and the reanimation player at the table is going to be ripping their hair out.
Well, that is all of the non-land new cards in this deck. Moving right into it, this is a lands-heavy deck, so there are 6 new lands. And I thought we would cover those kind of independently from the other new cards, so just go from lands directly into you looking at the mana base before we cover the rest of the reprints.
Yeah, there's primarily a lands-focused deck, as you said, so yeah, that makes sense.
Small spoilers, there are 44 lands in this deck.
That is a lot of lands.
It's a lands deck.
Yeah, but even then, 40 is generally, I would consider a lands deck, but let's see what's in here.
Well, our first of the new lands is Horizon of Progress. You can tap it, pay a life, add 1 mana of any type a land you control could produce. You can tap 3, tap it. You can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. You can tap 1, tap it, sacrifice it, draw a card.
Alright, if we pay a life and we tap it, we can fix ourselves. Well, not really fix ourselves. We have to have a land that can produce that mana, so we can just get a second pip of a land we already control, which could be relevant, but again, we're in Simic, so that has limited use in this particular deck. 3 mana and tap it, you get to ramp by putting a land into play from your hand. That's always appreciated since, again, we're probably going to be seeing a lot of landfall triggers and such, as well as just getting extra lands for the synergies that we saw previously, so that's going to be useful. And then just being able to crack this to draw a card. For example, if we turn it into a desert with the previous effect, we just get it right back into play, and there's probably ways to get lands back from our bin. So yeah, this does a lot. Yeah, I like this one.
I like this one elsewhere more than here.
Yeah, I agree. This becomes more useful in the event that you have just more colors because that fixing becomes more relevant.
If your deck is not green, this is a expensive ramp source.
Yeah, you're not going to complain about that. Just being able to, on off turns where you have nothing better to do, just spend 3, tap it, get a land from your hand into play. And that, conveniently, doesn't have to be at sorcery speed. You can do that at instant speed.
If I'm in blue-white hard control, just having this, leaving it up, and just, well, I didn't have to do anything. Guess I'll put an island into play. Because I'm already going to be drawing so many cards. Plus, it's never a dead draw in the late game.
Yeah, because you can always crack it to draw a card. It's good here, it would be good in another deck, so this is a decent new addition to various decks' arsenals.
I'm not going to go so far as to call it an all-star, but it's a very good card. Our second land here is Lazotep Quarry. It is a desert that you can tap for a colorless. Or you can tap it and sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana of any color. Or if you pay X and 2, and tap it, and sacrifice a desert, you then get to exile target creature card with mana value X from your graveyard, and then create a token copy of it, except that it is a 4/4 black zombie, only at sorcery speed. This lets you eternalize, I believe that's the one.
Yes, you would be able to eternalize, but I'll be honest here. The only thing people care about is that middle ability, because that is insane. This goes in every Aristocrats deck ever.
The fact that this lets you eternalize things from your graveyard, like anything, is very useful.
Yeah, but you're primarily going to be using this to sacrifice your creatures.
Maybe.
It is good to have a way to instantly sacrifice your creatures, and having it on a land, and a land that fixes you for any of your colors on top of that. Yeah, this is all upside for decks that care about getting things into their bin.
Fair enough. I just like to think of it as it's just going to be a useful little, engine in this deck to get some of your creatures back.
Oh, that's fair. I'm not going to deny the fact that that last ability is going to be just a good reanimation piece. Maybe not the best, because generally you're going to be reanimating things with bigger stats than that, but it's not bad.
It's something incidental you can have in decks that are still graveyard focused but aren't full-on reanimator. Even if this is just your one desert, sometimes well, I milled over that piece I want. I might as well get it back.
I more see it as a piece that you put in Aristocrats decks, and then if an important piece that you're using to turn all your sacrifice into damage, like let's say Sir Conrad the Grim, for example, gets destroyed by your opponents, which is very likely going to happen, you can use this to bring him right back, and then they have to deal with him again, or just die.
I expect the black decks have more ways to recur him that don't revolve around exiling him. I'm thinking more about some blue-green or green-white decks that the graveyard matters, but we don't have a lot of actual proper creature recur.
I mean, that works too.
Okay, well, our next new land is Sunken Palace. It's a cave that enters the battlefield tap and can tap for a blue mana. Or you can tap it, 1 and a blue, exile 7 cards from your graveyard, and it generates 1 blue mana. But when you spend that mana to cast a spell or activate an ability, you copy it and can choose new targets.
It's a cave. There's internal cave synergies for that particular archetype. Taps for blue, generically, so that's fine. And then that last ability lets you do something with your bin to get an additional copy of a spell. That's not bad. In the late game, where your bin is overflowing, and if you're not in a particularly graveyard-focused deck, being able to turn your graveyard into a resource is not bad. So maybe this sees play outside of this particular deck in Spellslinger decks that are just filling their bin right quick with lots of low-cost spells. Here, I'm not sure how much value we're going to be getting out of that, because I'm not sure if the direction here is we want to use our graveyard as a resource by reanimating things in the graveyard, which would make this a non-bow, or if we don't have that capability, then this card becomes better because we then have the capability of turning our graveyard into a resource by copying spells and activated abilities.
The next of our new lands is the Talon Gates of Madara. This is a gate, and then when it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target permanent phases out. You can tap it for the colorless, you can tap 1 and it to filter into 1 mana of any color, and you can spend 4 mana to put this on the battlefield at instant speed.
Okay, so the tap for a colorless, that's fine. We're in Simic, so we don't generally need anything better than that since we're in 2 colors anyway. Filtering for any colors, again, we're in Simic, so that's not going to have too much of a bearing. That last ability, though, does turn this, into a flash speed way to just protect something from removal, protect something from a board wipe, to get rid of a blocker that's in the way. Remind me again when creatures come back from being phased out, is that the end of the turn?
Phasing is they don't exist and they phase back in automatically next untap step.
So this does protect against a wipe. This does also just get rid of a blocker for functionally the remainder of your turn. So yeah, this is a good piece that can be used both offensively and defensively. And if we have ways to bounce it, if we have ways to send it to the bin and then get it back, we can reload this. I'm assuming, again, we have the capability to do that since we're in a lands deck. Yeah, this is a good piece.
The first card we looked at lets you bounce lands back to your hand, and hey, this one has a non-basic land type. This is the perfect one to keep returning to your hand with your little Moonfalk and keep drawing cards and keep being really annoying.
Yeah, because with that first one, you get to draw when you do that, and then you have a piece of removal or a defensive piece in your hand that you can use at instant speed so long as you have your mana up.
Yeah, and when you have enough mana and enough ways to bounce it, you can actually just start phasing multiple things in response to a wipe.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, this one's a good one.
The next of our new lands is Trench Post. It's a locus.
Is this our third locus?
Cloud Post, Glimmer Post, and I think it's our third locust. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. But besides tapping for colorless mana, tap 3 in this and mill a card for each locus you control.
So tapping for colorless, again, we can live with it. We're in 2 colors. Now, generally, I can't really foresee this being a way to mill out an opponent in a 100-card singleton deck, but I suppose if the game goes long enough and we've got enough everything counters on our lands.
You'd be surprised if you start making copies of your Trench Posts somehow, and then you have multiple of these, then it can get real, scary.
Yeah, it's fair, but so far I've only seen one way to copy a land. Generally, I can see this as a way to target yourself, get more things into your bin if we have ways to, again, make use of our graveyard as a resource. Otherwise, this is sure, in theory you can mill out an opponent with this, but that is going to require a lot of setup.
This is definitely a card that is scary in concept because of how scary locuses have a history of being, but because we're a singleton format, it's more concept than execution unless you really dedicate yourself to it.
Right. It's not like it's hard to get these, because green has access to ways to just fetch up non-basic lands, so theoretically you can just grab this, but the question is really, why would you?
Well, we have one final card that I actually saved for last, so it's a little out of order. It is Planar Nexus. Planar Nexus is every non-basic land type. You can tap for a colorless, or filter with it.
So it just comes into play with an everything counter on it functionally.
Pretty much. Hey, it's another locus.
Yeah, unofficially. But yeah, it just comes in with an everything counter on it, so it just triggers all the other internal synergies that your lands with internal synergies would need to trigger or proc or have. So yeah, it's fine. It's fine in this deck. This deck's entire gimmick is turning your lands into everything.
This legitimately might be the most interesting card from the deck, and might see the most play in as many places as possible, just because, hey, it's another gate for my gate deck. Hey, it's another desert for my desert deck. Hey, it's another cave for my cave deck. It just goes in so many niche archetypes. And also it kind of enables you to play the Urza lands in Commander a little bit more. Just because, hey, this turns on all of my Urza lands.
It does. You really can't complain about that. The flexibility it brings to other archetypes is going to be very, very good. It's going to have a lot of different homes in a lot of different decks. I really can't complain about this one either.
So to dovetail directly into the mana reprints, there's only a handful that are really worth mentioning. The first, just get out of the way, simple, easy, the Dreamroot Cascade.
Sure, slow land reprint is always appreciated. These need to come down in price because these slow lands are always creeping back up.
They're about to rotate out of standard with Bloomburrow, I believe, so probably going to go down a little after then. But it's a nice to have.
Yeah, the reprint is appreciated.
The second of the lands is Dark Depths.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. We're going to have a bunch of mana because we're going to be ramping like crazy probably to be able to get these ice counters off of this thing.
Well, the big thing is we have copy land.
Right, so you play copy land, targeting Dark Depths. It comes into play as this without any counters on it. It immediately turns into Marit Lage. And your opponents then have to deal with a 20/20 evasive, incredibly resilient creature.
You do have to sacrifice the other one because
of the legendary rule.
And small spoilers to the land base you're going to see in a second, deck also has Thespian Stage to do the same thing.
Do the same thing. Yeah, that makes sense.
Our next land reprint is Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth.
Yeah, this is an expensive one, is it not?
I think it was maybe $15 before the reprint.
I mean, how much mileage is it going to be getting in this deck?
The deck has a lot of stuff that doesn't tap for colored mana because it's a lands deck.
Yeah, so taps for green now. This isn't the craziest inclusion here because, again, 2 colors, but it's not a bad card. It's not a bad card in any means, and you'll be happy to have it just because it's an expensive one, if anything.
And lastly, our other major value land reprint is Vesuva itself, her domain. It had to be here.
Yeah, this is just a copy of whatever you want. So if we're looking at the surface level, this is just another cave, this is just another Urza's, this is just another whatever. Otherwise, yeah, you can also just get an extra copy of utility land and more fixing.
It was also like $17 before this.
Yeah, fair. It's a good price point reprint. It's a good card for this deck, so it really does tick all the boxes here for what we want to see in reprints.
And now, quickly, an emphasis on quickly, looking at the mana base of this deck. Again, 44 lands, and it is... I mean this in the nicest way possible all over the place. Like, we've got a bunch of gates, we've got all of the locuses, we've got a bunch of deserts, we've got a bunch of caves, the Hidden Cataract and Hidden Nursery Discover cycle, straight up from LCI. We've got some man lands like Lair of the Hydra, Lumbering Falls, we've got all the Simic fixing you could expect, and then just round it out with a couple deserts, including, I believe, the deserts straight up from Thunder Junction.
What I'm concerned about here is the fact that a lot of these lands come into play tapped. Like, a lot of them.
A fair amount. Less than you'd think, but yeah.
Unfortunately, when you're looking at more than 15 tapped lands in a deck, that turns your land base quite glacial. And that's what I'm concerned about. Generally, lands decks aren't really slow. They're not the fastest decks in the world, but they can outpace our opponents because we want to get our ramp online, we want to make sure we get the game plan rolling, and this land base isn't really doing the deck any favors.
There are 13 unconditional enters the battlefield tapped lands.
It's not quite 15, but it's still pretty bad.
Also, all 3 of the Urza's lands are in here.
Well, that makes sense, because you just need one and everything counter to get it online.
Yeah, no, it means that Urza's Tower is incredibly powerful, because it's just, well, this is a 3-mana land.
I'll have to test this one because, firstly, I think we have too many lands. 44 is pushing it on the level of how many lands we have in this deck. And then if we can get that number of tapped lands down to something a bit more reasonable, sub 10, to speed this up a little bit, then, yeah, I can see this working. But overall, I'm thinking this one looks quite slow.
We do have green, which has a lot of way to get extra land drops, so...
That is something worth considering, but it doesn't matter if we have the ways to get the extra land drops if we can't cast them or we have to wait a full rotation to cast them because of our lands being naturally slow.
Well, that's enough about the mana base. Let's go back and look at the actual reprints in the deck. And speaking of these reprints, we're going to start off with the honorable mention, a card that, if it's not going to be reprinted, it's going to keep climbing up in price. A card you know and love, Beast Within.
Yeah, Beast Within is a staple green piece of removal, so yeah, there's really no excuse not to run this.
Is it ever going to be below $1?
Probably not. Well, I say that, but then again, the white version of this generous gift is 40 cents right now, so maybe, with enough reprints.
Maybe, but for now... It's not expensive, but enough where you go, huh, I'm surprised it's that expensive.
Yeah.
Now, the next reprint is definitely something that is probably going to get its price tanked in the short term, because I've already seen it drop below the threshold, and it's probably not going to go up. Mirage Mirror.
Yeah, that makes sense in this deck because we want to be able to get copies of our lands. This is another way to cheat out Merit Lage. So, yeah, getting extra copies of our utility lands, being able to get Merit Lage out for free, or even just getting extra copies of our landfall creatures that I'm assuming we're going to be seeing later because we want to get more triggers off of them. Yeah, this is going to get a lot of mileage.
Heck, you can just copy Desert Warfare and just go real wide.
Yeah, this is a good inclusion here. I like it.
Another cheap artifact that used to be a little bit more expensive, works for this deck perfectly, Expedition Map.
Yeah, this is a colorless way for us to just search for any land. So, yeah, this is a staple of lands decks. It needed to be here. You're not going to complain about it.
Like, this is a modern playable card, so, yeah, it's going to be expensive unless we keep churning them out, and here it is.
Yeah, makes sense.
Sticking with the cards that are relatively cheap and hopefully going to get cheaper, next is Uvenwald Hydra.
Yep, Uvenwald Hydra is another land tutor, and because we're in lands, we're going to have lots of lands in play, so this thing's stats are going to get out of control. Yeah, really can't complain about that.
Fair enough. Again, sticking on cards that are not super expensive yet. You know, they're reprinted here, and hopefully they're just going to be near bulk. Vivian Reed, the original.
Okay, so +1 functionally in this deck will get us extra lands into our hand. -3 is just spot removal, which hits a decent number of things. That -8 is powerful. It's a powerful emblem to functionally just grant overrun to our creatures forever, but without any ways to proliferate our stuff, that's going to be a hard sell, I think.
She's definitely incremental value in this deck. In this deck, I'd think of this as primarily artifact and enchantment destruction with a little bit of incremental card draw.
Maybe. I can't say that I'm enamored with this particular card. I think there are better land-based planeswalkers. I could see this being replaced in the deck with a more lands-oriented planeswalker, but Vivian Reed here is serviceable.
Moving right along, our next, again, okay reprint that feels like it's never going to go down below this price, Arcane Denial.
Yeah, for some reason, Arcane Denial refuses to go beneath a certain threshold, no matter how many times they reprint it. It is a very good spell, though, considering that it doesn't have the pip requirement that Counterspell does, and functionally replays itself, so long as you're okay with your opponent replacing the spell you countered and then getting another card on top of that.
I can't be 100% sure because I'm not the most CEDH kind of guy, but I think that giving 2 cards to an opponent to stop them from winning is very relevant. Because, well, okay, you're not winning, now I'm going to win.
Yeah, spell disruption in Commander is always kind of a tricky subject because you're just doing a 1-for-1 in a format where you have 3 opponents. But the fact is that this just can save you and doesn't have the requirements that something like Counterspell, which is its direct competition, would have. So yeah, this is a good reprint. It's good spell disruption. Yeah, you're going to run this because occasionally it'll just save your life.
Okay, the next, and we're starting to hit into cards that are a little bit more valuable. Again, a lot of these have already dropped a considerable amount. We have Ramanop Excavator.
We're running a bunch of deserts. We have ways to sacrifice our own lands outside of that. Being able to get them back from the bin is important, especially if we have other ways to get lands into our bin outside of their own effects, such as lands that cycle themselves, which we've seen in deserts, ways to mill ourselves. Overall, this one's a good one. This one keeps creeping up in price again, and having it in this deck is going to help bring that price down while also being good in the deck itself.
This is the second consecutive Commander deck set that has had a Ramanop Excavator in it, which is a real good thing, because this feels like it should be closer to bulk than as expensive as it used to be. So, another one, which, it's a curious inclusion, but it makes sense, because again, a lot of our lands don't tap for colored mana, Chromatic Lantern.
I disagree with this one in this deck on the fact that we're in 2 colors.
Go back and look at that mana list, a lot of them just tap for colorless.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to have to play with this deck out of the box and see if the fixing is enough from the mana base, because if it is, Chromatic Lantern really doesn't belong here. You want this in like 3, 4, or 5 color decks. 2 color decks, unless you have a really weird mana base, generally don't want this, but then again, this particular deck could fall under that category, so we'll just have to see. Then again, even if you're not keeping it in the deck, it's always just good to have a Chromatic Lantern just to take it out and put it into your 3, 4 color deck. So even if you're not using it here, it's going to find a home in some other deck.
Yeah, no, it is the ultimate 5-color card and is always going to have a place somewhere.
Yeah.
The next card on our list is yet again another lands focus card that has been printed in the new Thunder Junction Commander decks. It is my friend and yours, Avenger of Zendikar.
Well, you know, this makes sense now, doesn't it? Because we're in lands, we're getting extra land drops, we're going to have lots of lands in play when this comes down, probably a lot more than the 7 this takes to cast, get a bunch of 0/1s, and then get a bunch of extra land drops and make those 0/1s into gigantic threats. So this is a finisher for the deck. This is how you're going to win games many a time. It's a good card. It's a good card.
This is definitely probably better in the alternate Commander, where you, by the time you're playing your Avenger of Zendikar, if your commander's died once or twice, you're going to play it and get 3 lands.
Yeah, that's true. But the face commander can still very much make use of this because just because of what the deck wants to do, you still have all the necessary pieces to make Avenger of Zendikar a viable finisher.
Moving on, speaking of big dumb landfall idiots, though this is a lot of little dumb landfall idiots, it is Scoot Swarm.
Yeah, Scoot Swarm is a very good card, obviously. Just like Avenger of Zendikar, it is a way for us to just flood our board with creatures, and once we get to that threshold of 6+ lands, we are going to just be exponential here. And gets real dangerous with additional land drops, gets real dangerous with land-based ramp, in the fact that this can go from 1 copy to 20 copies of itself before your turn is even over. If you get particularly lucky, that's not something a lot of opponents are going to be able to deal with without being able to wipe the board.
And now, ultimating your Vivian seems a little bit more likely as you have this giant wall of insects for them to claw through. And then when you do that and you have a bunch of 3/3 Vigilance Indestructible Tramplers, the game's pretty much over.
That's true. But again, that's not a testament to how powerful Vivian is. It's a testament to how powerful Scoot Swarm is.
Yes. It's just, it works well with it.
Yeah, it does. Then again, so do a lot of cards.
Yes. Up next, we have a piece of premium removal. It is Pongify.
No, I wasn't expecting to see this in here, but it is a welcome surprise because Pongify just refuses to drop below $3.
It just got reprinted in Thunder Junction, just like the last two, Scootsworm and Avenger, and it's still $3.
It's a good spell. It's a good removal spell, because this is not quite Path to Exile. This is not quite Swords to Plowshares, but it is still very powerful, very efficient removal in blue. Creature removal in blue specifically, which is not something that you generally think of when you think of that particular color.
It is the weirdest little caveat. It is creature removal that gets around regeneration in blue.
So it's not quite an exile, but...
And it's 1 mana.
Yeah, 1 mana. It's not a bad card. It's a good reprint. I enjoy seeing it here. It may not be the most high-value reprint, but again, it is one of those things that we live in a world where Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares are about $1 or hover around there. That's where I want to see both Pongify and Rapid Hybridization. Getting them in more Commander products is one way to bring down that price.
Well, you thought this deck was slow, right?
Yes.
Well, here's a way we deal with that. It's propaganda.
That doesn't speed us up, though. This just slows down everybody else.
It slows them down.
Yes. In this case, propaganda. I'm not sure how I feel about this particular card in this particular deck. Whenever I think propaganda and pieces like it, I'm thinking Pillow Fort Piece, Group Hug, that type of thing. I'm not 100% sold on this one being in the deck. It's fine, but unless we have other ways to prevent our opponents or de-incentivize our opponents from attacking into us, it's gonna probably get cut.
It's just a nice $5-ish reprint that, if you're playing it out of the deck, yeah, this can be a little slow because it's got a lot of tap lands. So on 3, let's slow them down too.
You mean on 4 because you play a tap land on 3.
Well, moving on to another $5-ish card that we haven't seen for a bit, Drown in Dreams, back from the Innistrad Midnight Hunt decks.
Yeah, Drown in Dreams. This is, I wasn't expecting to see this here either, honestly. I forgot this card existed, mainly because it's out of my price range. But yeah, being able to pump mana into this is not going to be a problem, because again, we're just going to be lousy with mana in the mid to late game. Being able to get both modes of this is going to be nice. It's fine. I don't expect this again to mill out other players with that secondary effect, but being able to reload our hands is generally good enough.
It's instant speed X cost draw that also has some incidental mill, which occasionally just is going to be real useful.
Yeah, fair. You're not going to complain about this.
Well, next we have the first of what I like to think of as the top-end reprints for this deck. This one is with new art, but still Stupid Sexy Dryad of the Elysian Grove.
Ah, yes, Stupid Sexy Dryad. Again, fixing yourself is not all that relevant in this deck. We're in 2 colors.
It helps.
Yeah, you're not going to complain about it because occasionally you're just drawing a bunch of colorless lands and this will do it. However, that additional land drop is where it's at. You're going to be getting more landfall triggers. You're going to be ramping harder. You're not going to complain about this. And this card is $12, $13, if I remember correctly.
It's closer to 10 now, but it was a little bit higher.
Still not budget, but yeah, you're not going to complain about it coming in the box, and you're definitely going to keep it.
And he's still got the bedroom eyes.
Yep, he still wants to do things to you.
Well, our next higher cost reprint is same era of Magic the Gathering. It's Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath.
Uro's in here. Yeah, okay. So Uro's the poster child of what everything Simic wants to do, right? You draw cards, you get ramp. Yeah, you really can't complain about this. He costs a bit, doesn't he? He's 15 plus?
Ish. Again, we're around 10-ish now, 11. He might have been a bit more prior to this. It's just, Uro is banned in a lot of places where he would be good. Banned in Pioneer, he's banned in Modern. Honestly, he's actually banned in some of the smaller Commander formats like Dual Commander, so you don't see him a lot, because he's not over the top for Commander, and I don't know if he meets the cut in Legacy. Apparently he does, but on some real basic search, there are more than a few Legacy decks running Uro, but, you know, at that point, $10-15 is not going to be the thing that breaks the bank.
But in this particular deck, he does everything the deck wants to do, right? Get additional land drop when you play him. He's just a 3-drop ramp piece when he comes down, sacrifices himself. I haven't seen a huge amount of ways to recur things from our bin outside of our lands, so being able to pay that escape cost to get him back is going to be easy, and then he just keeps doing what he does as he swings in. So yeah, you really can't complain about any of that.
And the 3 life, it might feel like very little, but it adds up. 3 life here, he attacks again, another 3 life. The slow deck is getting to pad its life total.
Yeah, you're not going to complain about dropping a 6/6 on board that just generates card advantage and ramps you and pads your life totals against decks that maybe are trying to burn you out.
Okay, up next is another 15-ish, $13, $14 card that, while not a lands card, is absurd in a lands deck. It is Mana Reflection.
I mean, is this overkill?
Is there such thing as overkill?
When you're paying 6 to double your mana base, and I don't think we've seen enough X spells to warrant this. I mean, you're going to run out of spells before you run out of mana at this rate.
There's a few other X spells in the deck.
Yeah, this is one of those that you drop this and it sticks, you're gonna just run roughshod because you're gonna be able to dump your hand each turn. Then the concern becomes I need to be able to generate enough card advantage to replenish my hand consistently enough. How much is this going for? 15?
It was like 14, 15 before this, and it's coming down now.
Maybe you'll leave this in because it's an expensive card and you're going to still appreciate the fact that your mana base has been doubled. But yeah, is it necessary in this particular deck? I don't think so, but it's still nice to have, I suppose.
The deck is ramping pretty hard, so you're probably not going to get this out on 6 if you see it in your opener with a decent hand. It comes out on 4 or 5. Jumping to 10 on turn 6 is going to make everyone probably just leave.
Yeah, but then you have to question, you may have 10 mana available, but you're dumping all this into ramp. You may not have enough cards in hand to be able to make use of all that mana.
Fair enough. You ask what we're going to do with 10 mana. Well, that's our last reprint. I know you know this one's in here, so we've talked about it before. It's Apex Devastator.
Yep, Apex Devastator, which has no business being in a lands deck, but the deck has green in it, so why not?
It's also something to do with all that mana.
So it turns out if you have 10 mana open and you just drop this and get 4 more spells on top of a 10/10 body, that is a lot of value, turns out.
It's a lot of value. Now, mind you, looking at the full deck, you're going to get a lot more value than winning the game, but it's still going to be a lot of nice value.
Yeah, you can't complain about this, particularly the fact that we're just getting more Apex Devastators into the wild,
Yes.
because this card has been $20 for a while. And hopefully this brings down the price to something a bit more reasonable. I can't foresee this going below 10, but being able to be a bit more accessible is always a bonus. And despite this not really fitting with the rest of the deck's playstyle, as it not really caring about lands at all, the fact that you're just getting a bunch of free spells off a gigantic body should be enough to warrant its inclusion.
Well, that's all the major reprints for the deck, but I'm still going to ship you the full list to take a look at. And at this point, we've actually covered, I think, more than half the deck, because you saw the mana base as well.
Yeah, so we're just going to look at everything minus the mana base to make sure to see if there's anything particularly spicy here that may have gone under the radar because the price isn't there. Hydroid Krasis, that's another creature that we can pump a bunch of mana into to turn into a viable threat and, again, reload our hands.
Not so great with the Apex Devastator, but you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, if you hit this with Apex Devastator, you're sad, but, I mean, them's the breaks.
Like, it's primarily ramp creatures, a fog bank, which is present for some reason, but it's ramp creatures and then giant creatures.
Skullwinder is one way to get resources back from the bin, so long as you're okay with giving your opponents resources as well. Tatiova makes sense.
Yeah, belongs here. Rampaging Baloffs, Terrassi Nasty, just some big dumb idiots.
I mean, Rampaging Bailout's going to get a lot of value here, right? Because of all the land drops we're getting. And Terrastodon is one of those cards that eventually just, when you do drop him, because it takes forever to get to him, does just blow out 3 non-creature permanents. And congratulations, they're getting 3/3s. We've got a 9/9, so I'll take that deal any day. Our other walker is Nissa, Steward of the Elements. She is not a bad walker, just because she brings extra lands into play and then lets us animate our lands, which is ways we want to close out the game with.
Like, you move on, just it's a bunch of non-standard land ramp, usually the kind of stuff that gives you extra land drops compared to searching, like Growth Spiral or Eureka Moment, but also like Sylvan Scrying to actually get whatever weird utility land you need out.
This spell lineup here, for instance, in sorceries, is pretty good for the extra land drops with Eureka Moment, Hour of Promise, Urban Evolution.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here because, like, we've got Summary Dismissal and Evacuation and Replication Technique, and I don't know what those cards are supposed to be doing, but it's interesting.
I mean, Evacuation is in here because we're in Simic, and our one flaw is we don't have any good board wipes.
Fair.
I mean, apart from Cyclonic Rift, but if it was in here, we would have talked about it.
Yes. The artifacts aren't, super interesting. It's largely ramp stuff we've talked about and Oblivion Stone.
Yeah, again, we're in Simic, and we have no good board wipes.
And that's pretty much the whole deck, because we talked about half of it between reprints and the mana.
Yeah, I think that after seeing this, my initial assessment was at least partially true. The
Yeah.
fact that our commander lean into the archetypes of land specifically, like cave synergies, like locust synergies, gate synergies, desert synergies, that type of thing.
Normally you have to go into a 5-color deck to do those things really well, because there's not a lot of depth.
Yeah, and Omo allows us to go ahead and just do that in 2 colors because she gets to turn any land into all those land subtypes to make our job easier. Like I mentioned previously, the only real concern I have is that the land base seems quite slow to me, and maybe too many lands. 44 and 13 some odd tapped lands is going to be something that means we're generally going to find ourselves flooded out.
I'll be fair to the deck. Dark Depths is not a land. It's a spell masquerading as a land. It doesn't tap for mana.
That's fair.
It is also interesting. This deck doesn't really seem to do much, if anything, with the first ability on Omo, or the third one, the one that gives all the creature types. It's useful with Avenger of Zendikar, because that makes your everythings into plants, so everything gets the tokens. But outside of that, there's a lot of room to work with.
Right. We discussed this earlier, but Mitch from Commander's Quarters, he stated that he wanted at some point to build a tribal deck that took advantage of a bunch of lords and them synergizing with each other and doing stuff like that.
Specifically for calling out people in the community, I know that Tomer from MTG Goldfish has had that deck before.
So yeah, this is just another variant of that, right? You could run theoretically just oops all lords and just have the ability to go ahead and just turn all of your creatures into those creature types and get all the benefits, which, let's be fair, you're probably running merfolk because we're in Simic, and then just turning good creatures into merfolk and taking advantage of that.
Because historically that deck archetype is all 5 colors and taking advantage of something like, say, the Ur-Dragon to just use a powerful 5-color type of lord stuff and then apply it to your whole deck with a bunch of other stuff that also then applies.
Right, and you don't have to worry about running the dead cards that do it, like the enchantments that turn all your creatures into the particular type you choose and stuff like that, because your commander just does that. But yeah, this is a good deck. Overall, it's Simic lands, it does Simic land things. We'll see if there are enough landfall triggers in here. I didn't see too many ways to get extra lands into play, so maybe adding in a few more of those. Apart from that, and fixing the mana base maybe a bit, I can see this playing pretty good out of the box.
It might, need another finisher or two, but, otherwise, yeah, I agree.
All right, Kaprak, you got anything else for me?
Nope, that's the whole deck and pretty much everything.
All right, so that's another one in the books. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, if any of you would like to support the channel, please consider subscribing, commenting down below, and giving us your opinion on how you enjoyed this content. Additionally, our 20K subscriber giveaway should hopefully still be going on. If not, I'll cut this part. So if any of you would like to enter, I'll include a link in the description below, so you can go ahead and enter for a chance to win the Get Rog Ravenous Ride deck, along with a bunch of other goodies alongside it. Otherwise, this has been Grazzet.
And I'm Kaprak.
And have a good one, folks, and stay safe.